Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. And today I bring you another episode of the Archival Discourses. Today I'm going to be doing a follow-up to last week's stream where I was looking at Purim Sorokin's ideas of systems of culture as he lays out in social and cultural dynamics. We went through the sort of ideas of the ideas of ideational, sensate, and idealistic culture. And I actually want to read through the bits today where he's sort of applying it to art. So let me just bring this up. Okay. Okay. Just zoom that in a bit. Okay. So move that along a bit. So ideational, sensate, and mixed styles in art, painting, and sculpture. Okay. Well, ideational and sensate visual styles. So both per se and for the aims of this work, one of the most important forms of recurrence is the repetition in space and time and fluctuation of the ideational, the sensate, the idealistic, and other mixed styles in all their varieties with all their secondary characteristics. It is important because when it is understood, it makes comprehensible many essential traits of a given art in a given period, which otherwise would appear as meaningless membra disjecta. It's important also from the standpoint of the mentally incorporated in the given art. Enough for the preliminary remarks. Now for the definitions. The pitch, now in this chapter, he's got a lot of different plates discussing the various bits of art he's talking about. They're not the best quality, but I think we can see enough to get a picture. And I suppose people can always bring the art up in like a separate tab or something if they want to have a better look at it. So in plate 1, which is this one, so it's got a load of native and tribal art from a book by Franz Boas, who's an anthropologist. So witness of plate 1 reproduce a few of the familiar geometric designs of the Indians. Their meaning is quite different from and infinitely more complex than their visual form shows. The real meanings of the pictures are as follows. In number 1, the upper zigzag line A represents a snake, the rectangular fields under it B, the sea moved by the wind. The dark corners of the rectangle C indicate calm on deep water, etc. The design of number 2 is called Cloud All Alone. Its meaning is still more complex. It is as follows, according to the Zuni Indians. When a person does not go to the dances when they dance for rain, after her death she goes to the sacred lake. When all the spirits of the other dead people come back to Zuni to make rain, she cannot go, but must wait there all alone, like a single little cloud left in the sky after storm clouds have blown over. She just sits and waits all alone, always looking and looking in all directions, waiting for somebody to come. That is why we put eyes looking out in all directions. In number 3, the main meanings of its various parts are as follows. A. Centipede. B. Savannah grass. C. F. Periwinkles. G. Butterflies. H. to J. Snakes. The meaning of number 4 is the cross in the center represents 4 clouds on the horizon. The color segments completing the inner circle represent red and blue birds soaring above the clouds. In the second circle are shown crosses representing red, yellow, and blue corn. In the outer zone is a zigzag line representing Mother East. As are more plates. Water, a deity. 9 triangles between head and tail of the serpent represent Mescal, which is held as a prayer for rain and health. In number 5, figure A means mountains. A figure and a trail, figure B, tents with fires in front. The meanings of the figures D and C are still more complex and abstract. There, the middle field represents the path of life of the child. The green dots in it symbolize the child's good luck or the success that he will have in life. In this case, green symbolizes growth and development, yellow, maturity and perfection, red means blood, life, and good fortune. Other parts of the figures represent the age of the child, the heart, the unexpected events of life, and so on. These examples show the existence of a style in painting or drawing where the designs have no or an exceedingly remote visual sensate resemblance to the meanings symbolized by them. So again, the ideational elements are the actual substance or meaning of the work, whereas the sensate is just the purely the appearance of the thing. So these sort of native tribal art pieces of material culture are ideational because they have a strong spiritual or simple meaning or substance, but are not particularly rendered very, very well physically. Okay. Figures 1 to 4, Plate 2 reproduce respectively Egyptian illustrations of a jug in a basin, a woman sleeping under a blanket, an Egyptian palace in Amarna, and several prisoners. With these, there are a picture, number 5, entitled Summer's Day, by distinguished modern artist O'Lerlinger, and drawings by contemporary children, number 6. A mere glance at the pictures is sufficient to see their visual, sensate unnaturalness. Here again, we have a set of pictures which seems to depict various objects, not as they look to our eyes, but as they exist in the mind of the artist, regardless of whether the picture has any visual resemblance to the objects when we look at them. And just go back up. Yes, you've got the pictures of children and the Egyptian sort of carvings and drawings. We've got Plate 3, which is below. So this one, we've actually got got a cello painting by Picasso, and then we've got some more carvings. So these are relief from Ludovisi sarcophagus of the 4th century, 3 and 4 scenes of the crucifixion as represented on the covers of New Testaments of about the 9th century. So we go back up. And Plate 3, number 1 is a reproduction of a famous work by Picasso, which depicts a cello or a violin, but again in a form quite different from that which is naturally impresses on the eye. The same is to be said of His Lady with a Lute, Plate 9, or of any cubistic, futuristic, or modernistic picture. Do not depict objects as they look to our eyes, but as they are in the mind of the artist, and their ideational essence as it is thought of by the artist. A few more examples. The next pictures we observe are from a scene from a sarcophagus of approximately the 4th century AD, number 2, and 2 scenes of the crucifixion, numbers 3 and 4, taken from the covers of a copy of the New Testament of about the 9th century. However, the illustration on Plates 2 and 3 differ from one another and from those on Plate 1. These illustrations all have in common the trait that they do not reproduce. The scenes and objects as they appear to our sight, such as a conglomeration of figures and objects piled one upon another, is impossible from the point of view of natural perspective. These pictures are ideational rather than visual or natural. If now we compare with these either the pictures created by Paleolithic man, a sample of which bison number 1 is given in Plate 4, or those of several contemporary primitive groups, a sample of which is also given, Bushman rock paintings number 2, or the Dying Lion number 3, and the Gazelle in the Steppe number 4 from Ashurbanipal's palace in Nineveh, or virtually any other picture known to us as natural and the product of skill, the contrast is clear. While the preceding group does not strive to depict the objects as they appear to our eyes, these last all attempt to depict them in their exact visual impression, as we see them and only so. After these remarks and examples, the profound difference between what I hear style, the ideational and the visual sensate styles must be clear in its essentials to the reader before we can proceed to a more detailed and more precise and more meaningful analysis of these styles and their intermediary or mixed forms. In their pristine nature, the ideational and the visual sensate styles, from their standpoint of the mentality which they represent and the purposes and forms of depicting objects, are directly opposite and as different as can be. One is transcendental and the other empirical or naive realistic. One lives in the supersensory world of being, the other in the sensate world of becoming. One is symbolic in its striving to depict by visible signs the invisible world. The other is impressionistic and illusory. One is static because the world of being is unchangeable and remains always equal to itself, like Plato's idea or the believer's God or the philosopher's ultimate reality. The other is dynamic by its very nature because its sensate world changes incessantly. Which of these styles and mentalities is real or realistic? It is useless to ask. The answer depends upon what is meant by real, reality, realistic. If by these is meant the unchangeable essence of an object, then the ideational style is realistic. If the elusive appearance of the sensory perceptual world is meant, then the visual style is realistic. 2. Main subclasses of ideational, visual, and mixed styles in painting and sculpture. Each of these two chief styles has different degrees of purity, beginning with the purest and ending with such a mixture of the elements of both styles that one cannot recognize in it either the ideational or visual, and is obliged to put into a intermediary, mixed, or ideational visual style. 1. Ideational style. A. Purist. The subject matter is super empirical or supersensory and is immaterial, like God, the Virgin, the soul, the spirit, the Holy Ghost, and other religious and mystical topics. In its form, i.e. the design, the picture, the sculpture, is purely symbolic, having no resemblance to the visual or sensory appearance of the object depicted. Since the topic is invisible, its visible symbol naturally cannot have any visual resemblance to it. Examples of such an art are to be found in the Christian pictures in the catacombs. An anchor, a dove, an olive branch, etc., that signify ideational phenomena quite different from these objects. Again, so the ideational is a simple or crude representation of a much more complex idea. B. In pure ideational style, though the subject is super empirical, the form in which it is rendered attempts to embody some visual resemblance to what is considered to be its empirical aspect, e.g., pictures of paradise, Inferno, the Last Judgment, Pieta, allegorical figures of virtue, vice, patience, temperance, the Muses, and similar topics rendered in the conventional visual form in which they supposedly exist or will exist. 2. The subject is empirical, but the form is symbolic, having little or no visual resemblance to the physical appearance of the subject. The geometric designs of many primitive peoples, symbolizing buffalo, snake, hunting, fishing, etc., like the Indian pictures discussed above, belong to this type. 2. Visual or sensate style. A. Purist. The topic is purely empirical and material, and the rendering is purely impressionistic, that is, illusionistic in its visual similarity to a momentary appearance of the empirical and sensory reality depicted. A good camera snapshot and the most completely impressionistic pictures are the best samples of the purist visual style. Such a style is dynamic because the visual empirical reality, though incessant play off light and shade, incessantly changes. It must be impressionistic in the sense of catching visual appearance at a given moment. In the sense, it is necessarily illusionistic, showy, presenting material objects in as illusionistic a form as they offer to our sense perceptions. The pictures of the leading French Impressionists at the end of the 19th century are conspicuous samples of such a purely visual style. Their rendering, as well as their theory, stresses the essentials of this purist visual style. For them, in painting, the only reality was the visual appearance of the objects. Behind and beyond it, there was nothing. This visual reality was ever fugitive and changing. Therefore, the task of artists like Manet, Degas, Renoir, and especially Claude Monet was to catch the momentary glimpse of the empirical phenomena as illusionistically as possible. What phenomena? It does not matter at all what is depicted. The more completely visual is the style, the more dynamic the picture, since it strives to catch just a passing moment in the ever-fugitive appearance of the visual arts of the empirical world. The impression of change, of becoming, of dynamism is unavoidable in such an art. Hence, inconspicuously visual pictures or sculptures or architectural creations, even in pictures on nature morte, the impression of dynamism, of restlessness, of fugitiveness is, as we shall see, a usual satellite. Moreover, the conspicuously visual art is painting, sculpture, and in part even architecture must be malarish, and the more malarish, the more visual it is. I use the term malarish in H. Wolflin's sense. Usually, visually, almost no material objects are separated from the rest of the world by a clear and unbroken line. Similarly, the parts of the objects are not separated from one another clearly. The visual world is the world of patches of different colours, of light and shade, imperceptibly merging into one another. It is not a world where boundaries of each object are clearly outlined by an unbroken line definitely separating one object and one colour from the others. It is a world of somewhat indefinite forms and colours merging into one another. As we shall see, and this has been excellently shown by H. Wolflin, the painting of the second half of the 16th and especially of the 17th and subsequent centuries tended to be more and more malarish in comparison with the linear character of the painting, sculpture, and architecture of the preceding centuries. In order to see the point, a glance at plate 5 is sufficient. Again, the sensate art is purely concerned with the visual appearance. It must try to represent the object as realistically as possible, but it's completely devoid of any sort of higher meaning. So we look at plate 5. So we've got Study for Eve by Dürer, got Two Women Dressing by Rembrandt, for St. Jerome and Estelle by Dürer, for The Artist in the Studio by Ostade, and then 5 Christ Carrying the Cross by Rubens. Okay. First pair of pictures, number 1 and number 2, represent similar subjects. A woman as treated by the linear Dürer and by the malarish Rembrandt. Dürer's etching gives us a clear linear representation of the body with all its details. It is sculptural, corporeal, tactile, architectonic. The artist separates the figure clearly from its surroundings, not because it so clearly stands out from the rest of the world to our eyes, but because he knows by his other organs of perception that it is a separate object, with each part having clearly defined individuality. He supplements and corrects ideationally its visual appearance, as this is given by our eyes only. Quite different is the sketch by Rembrandt. The figure imperceptibly merges into the rest of the world. No part is linearly defined. Instead, the patches of the light and shade and in other pictures The patches of various colours serve to give the visual and illusionistic impression of the subject. Nothing tactile or sculptural is in the picture. It is an illusionistic representation of a fugitive appearance. The same difference is clear in the second pair of pictures. Number 3 by Dürer, number 4 by Ostad, which treat a somewhat similar set of conditions. Ostad is Malerish, Dürer linear. One is purely visual, the other is only partly so. Finally, Rubens' picture number 5 stresses the dynamism of the Malerish style. So again, there can be a lot of different variation in sensate, because ultimately what Sorokin is getting at is it's more like a line with ideation at one extreme and sensate at the other extreme. And as you move along, you get more sensate elements until you get idealistic. But then as soon as you start moving further right, away from ideational, you start stripping out those ideational elements until you get a purely sensate construction. B. Impure visual style. Like the ideational style, the visual has different degrees of purity, running from the ideally pure, as outlined above, to the less and less pure forms until the result becomes so mixed that the visual strain in it ceases to be dominant. The main impure varieties of the visual style are as follows. 1. The topic is empirical or visual, but the rendering is not based exclusively upon the visual impression. It gives something not presented by the momentary appearance of the object to the senses, or suppresses some incidental and secondary visual elements, or introduces some generally ideal and non-visual elements, either in the content or in the style of the picture, sculpture, or architecture. Such are, for instance, character paintings and character portraits. In these, the artist tends to render not merely the momentary appearance of the subject, but his essential, lasting, dominant nature. Moreover, many so-called expressionistic paintings conveying some central idea are of this sort, and this is true also of most of the classical paintings and sculptures, which the careful selection of subject, of setting, of every detail of the picture of sculpture, and their elimination of everything incidental, unimportant, unclassical, debasing, and so on. The works of most of these periods, schools, and individuals belonging to the present subclass do not require to be represented by illustrations. The case of the modern expressionists like Cézanne is less clear. Therefore, illustrations of this school are not out of place here. It is enough to glance on plate 5 at the picture of Cézanne, number 1, or E. Haeckel's portrait of a woman, number 2, or the Egyptian bust of the reformer pharaoh Akhenaten, number 3. See clearly the point we have been discussing. Their technique is either impressionistic and Malerish or linear portraits. In content, they represent character painting with much what is non-visual worked into the rendering. So just to go up, this is this plate here. So we've got Cézanne, the etching by Haeckel, and then the bust of Akhenaten. So again, it's trying to represent something sensate, but it's an impure form of the sensate, because it's somewhat realistic, but it's not quite there in its representation. You could almost say a kind of artistic and Cali Valley. Okay. 2. Another main form of the impure visual style results when the topic is only partly empirical, but the rendering is conspicuously visual, such as, for instance, a purely naturalistic rendering of the Last Judgment, of the Christ child sucking singer, or of the Madonna in the form of a lady of the world about us, of virtues and vices, of the migration of the soul, of justice, of sin, and so on. 3. Mixed style. Though the impure forms of the ideational and of the visual are in fact mixed styles, the preponderance of the elements of one permits us to classify such renderings with the dominant style. By the mixed, on the other hand, is meant a style containing such a mixture of the elements of both main styles that one cannot, without difficulty, decide which elements are preponderant. The varieties of the mixed style, as this occurs empirically, are many. Of these, I shall mention here especially 3. A. Idealistic style, exemplified most strikingly by the Greek art of the 5th century BC and the religious art of Europe in the 13th century. The idealistic style is simultaneously ideational and visual. It is visual in the form in which it renders its subjects, but not entirely. As we shall see, it ignores on principle the profane, the incidental, the negative aspects of visual reality, and adds the noblest, the sublimest, the most beautiful and typical values, which are not apparent in the objects perceived visually. It idealizes, modifies, typifies, and transforms visual reality in conformity with its ideals and ideas. To this extent, it is not visual but ideational. The same is true of the subjects represented. They are carefully selected and in most cases are either of the non-empirical kind or of the half-empirical, typical, generalized in their nature. Nothing vulgar, debasing, ugly, unmoral, eccentric can be the subject of such an art. If negative values are chosen for depiction, even these are beautified, are used mainly for stressing by means of contrast the positive values. If an individual is represented in portraiture, he is typified according to the idealized type. In all these respects, the idealistic art represents a marvelous balance and an organic union of the elements of the ideational and the visual style, with some slight domination of the ideational. That it is a specific form of the mixed style. It has, of course, its own gradations and degrees with respect to the amount of dominance of or the closeness of approach to one or the other of the two opposed styles, but in its sublimest form, the idealistic maintains a steady balance between the two. So essentially, it's a harmonization of both of these elements. And then we've got some more plates. So a glance at plate 7, in which the idealistic is confronted with a purely visual or naturalistic rendering, will make clear that the nature of the idealistic art. Two sculptures of Pericles, numbers 1 and 2, one of Christ, number 4, two of the Pieta, 13th century, number 3, and 16th century, number 7, and two representing church, number 5, and synagogue, number 6, 13th century, offer examples of the idealistic treatment of subjects. And let's actually go down. So yeah, we've got these busts of Pericles, we've got the two renderings of the Pieta, and then we've got some busts, some Christian and synagogue sculptures. Again, just looking at the Pieta here by Michelangelo is actually the thumbnail for the stream, and just looking at it, you can really see this is a perfect example of the idealistic style, because again, it's representing something divine because it's a biblical scene. It is, Virgin Mary weeping over the death of her son Christ, but it's also rendered in a really beautiful, detailed aesthetic. So just to go back up. Okay. The 5 illustrations of plate 8 give examples of the impure visual or naturalistic rendering of, respectively, Caracalla number 1 and Christ numbers 2 through 5. The contrast is strikingly conspicuous. The idealistic treatment does not show anything of decay, senility, death, imperfection, even of a purely human excess of emotion and passion. Even mortals are depicted as immortal or noble or sublime, or as an idealized type. The naturalistic or impure visual treatment depicts even the immortal's Christ as mortal, the noble as vulgar, the great as debased. It is, in a sense, a debunking, rendering which takes from its subjects most of their greatness, virtue, romance, charm, heroism, divinity, sublimity, and depicts them naked in their vulgar aspects. This is clearly shown by the pictures of plate 8. Christ in these pictures does not have anything divine or great. He's just a corpse. Yes, here's what he's talking about. So you've got the bust of Caracalla there, where he's just scowling. Again, if this was an idealistic bust, Caracalla would be shown to be more heroic, and he'd probably have a neutral expression and not be scowling. Then we've got these renderings of Christ. There's one, and then these others. You see, Christ is very like decrepit and corpse-like in these pictures. He's not. There's none of these sort of divine grace that you would normally see in a more idealistic treatment. Corpse, an imperfect, ordinary human being. The same contrast is easily seen in the busts of Pericles and Caracalla. In the first, we are given an ennobled and idealized type rather than an individual portrait with real, i.e. visual traits. In the second, we see an individual as he really looks, without idealized typification. From these lines, one can see that the idealistic style of art is based on a specific Weltanschauung and the philosophy of life, intermediary in nature between that of the pure ideationalism and pure visualism, sensitism. From the very nature of the idealistic and the visual styles, and the mentalities on which they are grounded, a series of associated traits follows. The most important of them may be mentioned here. 1. To the extent that it does not try to reflect indiscriminately empirical reality as it is, but selects primarily those phenomena which conform to the supreme ideal, the idealistic art is almost always both a self-sufficient value created for its own sake and a means to express, to manifest, to convey, to teach, to propagate the ideal and its values, which lie outside art. Such an art is rarely art for art's sake, but almost always a partner or a companion, sometimes a handmaid of religion, moral and civic virtue, or of other values of a non-aesthetic character. This does not, however, prevent such an art from reaching a position of supreme achievement in the realm of art alone. The visual sensate art tends to be an art for art's sake so far as it does not tend to be a means to express anything except itself. It sees its main purpose and objectives in its reflection of the empirical reality as accurately as may be. It therefore is often associated with aestheticism in a particular sense, with that period in art history when art for art's sake appears, with its crowds or aesthetes, connoisseurs, collectors, professional critics, theorizers of beauty, professional artists who want to be artistic and nothing more. This is the period where art liberates itself, or rather believes that it liberates itself from any companionship with or subordination to anything outside of art itself, from religion, morality, civic duty, etc. This means in a straight formulation that such a realistic and supposedly absolutely free art is, in fact, the victim of its illusion. In fact, it becomes almost a servant, but a servant to different bosses from those of the idealistic or ideational art, to the golden calf, to the empirical visual reality, to the sensate, i.e. the eudaimonistic, hedonistic, and utilitarian needs, to the essential fancies of the Epicureans, the rich, the powerful. 2. Since the idealistic art has behind it as its inspiration soul some great ideal, such an ideal or value is always the value of a genuine collectivity. It is not and cannot be mere individual fancy. It is logical, therefore, to expect that this value embraces within itself the collectivity as well as the individual artist creators. The creation then tends actively to involve the collectivity in which the individual artists are only the leaders. Everybody strives to contribute what he can to such a creation because the value is the common value of all. Hence, the art of such periods tends to be stamped by the collective character of its creation, by the participation of masses in it, and by the anonymity of its individual artists. In this sense, it is non-individualistic and collectivistic or familistic, often as in the creation of many medieval Gothic and Romanesque or of the early Byzantine cathedrals or of some of the great Greek edifices. Even the names of their builders and creators are neither nor not preserved or are regarded as the names of the leaders only. Even when the real creator is an individual artist, his creation, if it is idealistic, represents always a collective value and therefore remains collectivistic. The sensate visual art, for the same reasons, tends to be, on the contrary, highly individualistic. It expresses the value of the artist, a value which may or may not be shared by the masses. Here, the artist is the creator. His name is attached to the creation and is inseparable from it. Since his creation is for him self-value, not a means to something else behind it, he is anxious to get a copyright, to immortalize himself in it, to attach his name to it. Individualism, in this sense, and the sensate visual art are correlated to a high degree. So again, in this very much early art, the idea of the individual creative genius is very much subdued to the greater collective, so to speak. And as you really get into the idealistic period, this would be like either the Greek classical age or Athens between the Persian Wars and the conquest of Alexander the Great, or this is the late medieval period, 1200 to about 1400. You start to see the rise of these individual great artists. People like Michelangelo. Well, not so much Michelangelo then; that was a bit before then. But if we're talking of writing, you've got people like Chaucer, for example. You've got Petrarch, and this goes on. Since the idealistic art embodies some great values, any individual person of the common sort, any common landscape per se, any common event, unless they are symbols of the great value, can have no interest or at best only a secondary interest. Only that object, person or event which incarnates the value has a direct relationship to it, may properly be the subject of the idealistic art. As to all the other subjects, it either passes them by or strips them of any real individuality, turning them into rationalized and idealized types, a kind of algebraic formula without any concrete arithmetical value. Hence the rationalistic, abstract, typifying nature of the idealistic art. Under such circumstances, the individual portrait, the empirical genre, the landscape, the historical scene, and anything concrete not related to the ideal are rare in such an art. Its main content centers around its chief idealistic values. If these be religious, then it would represent deities, great religious events, religious history, doctrines, beliefs, and everything else of great significance as judged from the standpoint of these values. In the visual art, the situation is the reverse. Only the empirical world, which always consists of individuals, objects, persons, events, is and can be the concern of such an art. There's the art of the portraiture of individuals, the art of the depiction of the daily genre, the art of the empirical events, historical scenes, landscapes. 4. The choice of the idealistic art with regard to subject matter and treatment is determined by the nature of the ideal value, not entirely separated, however, from the empirical world as it is in the ideational art. All that is foreign to this value is unimportant for such an art and is passed over by it. The non-idealistic phenomena, especially, or the phenomena which are contrary to the ideal, unless they can be made to serve, by contrast, for the augmentation of the glory of the ideal value, are out of place in such an art. It passes by the prosaic, the debased, the defective, the common, the earthly. It does not see the baby as a baby, the old man as senile, the woman as womanish, and what it sees is some general and perfected type of man. Therefore, its babies are grown up, its old men are youthful, its women are manly, there is no sex in them. The visual art is earthly in its principle of selection. It depicts what may be interesting from the earthly standpoint and what may be picturesque, stunning, pretty, effective, romantic, truthful, sensational, marketable. By the law of contrast, it tends to concentrate on common aspects of life and the world, on the low, debased, perverse, evil, disgusting, sensual. Hence its tendency to depict scenes of common or low life, historical events, the drunkard, the prostitute, the street urchin, the criminal, the pretty face, the seductive body, the nude erotic figure, the portrait, and so on, or to render something that gives gratification to the eyes by its configuration of forms and its play of colours. Again, you can almost say that the shift to purely sensate art is some kind of artistic or cultural decline, where everything's rendered in this really sort of horrific, kind of low and degraded form. 5. The world of the ideal is thought to be eternal. It is the world of being. Eternal means static. Static means quiet, calm, serene, immovable, and unagitated, unshakably grounded and immersed in the ideal. The world of the empirical, and especially the visual empirical reality, means incessant change. Its forms, lights and shadows, colours and configuration, sounds, objects, and events are in a ceaseless flux, moving along the time scale of time. It is dynamic par excellence. Its human subjects are eternally agitated, full of passions, emotions, activity, effort. Their life is an endless succession of joys and sufferings, defeats and victories, comedies and tragedies, drama and boredom. Shall we wonder then that the idealistic arts tends to be relatively static? Its abstract figures are not agitated, they are calm and serene. The whole world is also a kingdom of undisturbable, eternal, motionless unchangeableness. The visual art, on the contrary, is charged with emotions, passions, agitation, and dynamics. It is dramatic, even comic, and humorous par excellence. 6. Since sensate gratification is not the object of the idealistic art, one cannot expect from its gratification of sensate needs or desires. It is not and cannot be frivolous. Therefore, the figures of women are relatively rare in it. Figures, faces, and scenes which are frivolous, seductive, sexual, tempting, gratifying, or pretty are out of place in it. In the visual art, the situation is the reverse. Yes, if anything, sensate is almost it's all about the form, or it's all about pure beauty, the representation of supposed beauty, rather than anything that could be spiritually or morally pretty or beautiful. 7. Since the visual art depicts not the lasting but the passing visual aspects of things, an incessant novelty, change of variety in its pictures and sculptures are its traits also. Otherwise, the same thing becomes sensuously boring, too familiar, devoid of a sense of novelty. The visual art must change incessantly. Therefore, it is and must be an art of mode and fashion and fad. The newer, the better. The more variety, the more enjoyment. Its fascination is in its looks, beyond and behind, if there is no infinity of ideational content, as in an ideational artwork. The ideational art, on the contrary, is of necessity associated with slow change, is an art of lasting, ever meaningful tradition, ever old in its form and ever new in the content which it does and can absorb, because it deals with infinity. Its values are the eternal values, well selected and well chosen. They do not require incessant change. Absolute value is the supreme value, and supreme value need not be replaced by other inferior values, even if these are quite new, ever-changing, perfectly modern. Therefore, the period of the domination of the ideational art is the age of tradition and convention. The period of the domination of the visual art is the age of mode, fashion, seeking for the newest and the most modern. In such an age, tout nouveau, tout beau. Essentially, what is new is what is beautiful. Therefore, there are no traditional and conventional forms in style. Every artist tries to create his own style, different from the others, hence an incessant change of the forms and styles of art in such periods. So, if anything, this is individualism taken to its extreme. There's no longer even an agreed style for everybody to emulate or any collaborative effort. It is entirely all about the self and what is the print you can place on art and society through what you create. Probably explains why we have all these idiosyncratic and weird modern arts and architecture. Such are some of the typical traits of the idealistic as contrasted with the visual sensate art. As to its difference from ideational art, it must be clear from the above characterization of the ideational style. The main difference between them is that while the pure ideational art is not attached in any way to the empirical visual sensate reality, either by its subject matter or by its form, the idealistic does have some connections. Many of its ideals are not transcendental but empirical. Its forms are visual. With one foot it stands in the ideational, while with the other in the empirical world. As we shall see, the idealistic style usually occurs when the ideational begins to decline, but without breaking entirely free from its super-empirical moorings, and when the visual style begins to grow without becoming, as yet, completely materialistic, mechanistic, hedonistic, and anti-religious. B. Cubistic mixed style. Another fundamental form of the mixed style is represented by such styles as Cubism, Futurism, Imaginism, Expressionism, as it is called often, and similar modernistic radical currents in art. These styles are neither predominantly visual nor ideational. They are not visual because they do not try to render small plates, render the object as it looks to our eyes. No cubistic, futuristic, or other picture of a similar nature gives a purely visual impression of the object. See plate 9. If we just go back up to plate 9, yes, so he's got some modern art here. So we've got Lady with a Lute by Picasso, Abstract Painting by Picasso, we've got Three Summer's Day by Neringer, 4 Das Arbeiterbild by Kurt Schwitters, and 5 Entfernung by Paul Klee. So these are all various forms of modern art. So, and there's some more plates here. Okay. When painters of this school try to depict the three-dimensional corporeality of a material object in these forms of cubes, they aim to represent not its digital form, because these 3 dimensions we cannot see, but its ideational form, its 3-dimensional solidity known by other organs or sense and stored in our mind. It is rightly said of Picasso, and can be said of most of the modernists, that they try to substitute a conceptual reality for the visual one. On the other hand, by these symbolic cubes or other non-visual signs, the artists of these schools do not try to represent something super-empirical, non-materialistic. On the contrary, these modern styles are in the realm of empirical reality from top to bottom, and are perhaps more empirical, sensate, materialistic than even pure visualism. They aim to depict all the solidity, spaciousness, weight, and other properties of the material world. So you can almost say that there's an interesting inversion where, rather than having a ideational subject but a sensate style, is almost the other way around, where the subject is sensate but the style is ideational. So you're almost putting everything on its head. See, other mixed styles. Besides the idealistic and the cubistic forms, there are many other varieties of the mixed style. When one studies, for instance, Egyptian sculpture, one notices even in the sculpture portraits from the Old Kingdom, the clearly and beautifully rendered visual style of the face or of the head of the person, and the quite unnatural from the visual standpoint rendering of the rest of the body, its posture, anatomy, configuration. The visual style is thus closely combined with the non-visual, sometimes conspicuously ideational form in the same sculpture or bas-relief or design. In this way, we have an example of, or so to speak, the mechanical unification or the spatial adjacency of the elements of both styles in the same sculpture or design. Another variety of the mixed style is exemplified in the predominant character of the early Chinese painting or pictorial art. It also often combines in a peculiar way elements of both styles. It is neither ideational nor visual. It is neither idealistic nor cubistic, nor is it even a mechanical mixture like that of the Egyptian. In one sense, it is even extremely visual, almost impressionistic, especially in many a paysage. On the other hand, it is ideational in several respects. Such an outline are the main styles into which fall all painting, sculpture, and in a slightly modified form, architecture, music, literature, and drama. Each of these styles has many gradations. The main forms that we have discussed are only a few of the chief marks on the scale of these numerous gradations, but these signs are very useful for orientation in the tremendously vast and complex ocean of the art world, and especially in the study of the life of art. Its courses, fluctuations, cycles, turns, and changes in the course of time. The analysis which we have just made constitutes the first test through which our categories of culture culture mentality must pass. The fact that they happen to fit perfectly for the classification of the main styles in art, that painting and sculpture fell quite naturally, so to speak, into these categories, indicates that they are not merely bloodless phantoms, a mere exercise in abstract logical classification. On the contrary, these preliminary concepts of ideational, sensate, and mixed styles embrace principles which are comfortable to and expressive of the actual empirical reality, which bring clear meaning to the complexity and confusion in the field of art. We shall see further that this classification of the styles in art is one of the most natural. It goes to the core of the predominant mentality shown in each style. It uncovers the essentials of the Weltanschauung of the artist and of his society. It stands in the closest relationship with the characteristics of other aspects of a given culture. Its science and philosophy, religion and morals, forms of social and political organization, the nature of the social relationships, in brief, with all the essential traits of the given culture and its mentality. In this sense, an understanding of the gestalt of a given culture at a given period helps us to understand the meaning, the origins, the methods of the predominant style of art, and an adequate knowledge of the art style and its proper interpretation in terms of these categories throws a peculiar light upon the culture in which it is born and prospers. And that's the end of that chapter. Sorokin very much giving this a nice broad overview of these culture styles, as you can see throughout art. Okay. We've got time. Let's read this next one. So, recurrence in social space and fluctuation in time of the ideational, visual, and mixed styles in painting and sculpture. We shall begin our investigation with the problem of the existence or non-existence of any perpetual trend for one or the two opposed styles to the other in the course of time generally, and particularly in passing from the early to the later stages of the history of the Greco-Roman and Western cultures. These cultures will be at the centre of our study of the problem. 1. Is the style of primitive art visual or ideational? In the 19th century, with its evolutionary and linearly progressive theories, it was pretty commonly accepted that in the development of art style there was a perpetual linear tendency, unlinear or spiral or oscillating from primitive art, devoid of skill and technique, to the present art, which supposedly is perfect and highly skillful. Most writers viewed almost all the forms of what is termed here the ideational style as the primitive style, which results from the inability of the artist to draw or to paint or to otherwise to reproduce the object properly. Ideational and primitive were often taken to be identical, while any competent rendering in the visual style was regarded as a manifestation of artistic skill. Maturity or technique progress in art and in aesthetic genius. Even now, many people looking at the paintings of Indians or Eskimos or Egyptians or other ancient peoples consider them certainly to be the result of a lack of artistic skill and as a manifestation of the primitiveness of the art of the ancients. However natural such opinions seem to be, in most cases they are wrong. The fault of such theories consists in the identification of ideational with immature, of visual with mature. As a matter of fact, the real situation in many cases is quite different. If anything, you can almost say that this is a Midwit's view of art history, of this idea that sensate is more intelligent than ideational. Often the ideational visual styles are not so much a manifestation of the presence or absence of skill and highly developed technique as the expression of quite different mentalities and different outlooks. One, as we have already observed in its definition, is the mentality of the being, the other of the becoming. The sensory mentality strives to depict physical objects visually. Therefore, it practices and learns how to do this. The ideational mentality does not care to do this. Therefore, it lacks practice. Instead, it trains itself to render things ideationally. If this be true, then we must expect that the primitive art of all cultures may have either of the two opposing styles at the same stage of development. This expectation is justified in fact. Some of the primitive peoples have predominantly ideational, some predominantly visual, and some both styles. Such a situation evidently gives a decisive blow to most of the linear theories mentioned above. Here are the corroborative data and the references. The paintings, drawings, and sculptures of Paleolithic man, as far as they are known to us, are predominantly visual. Some of them may be styled even visual impressionistic, being excellent snapshots of an animal emotion, a reindeer, a buffalo, a mammoth. When we pass to the drawings, paintings, and sculptures of Neolithic man, we observe that they are less visual and much more ideational. If we turn to the styles of the living primitive peoples, we find both styles present among them. Among some of the visual predominants, among the others the ideational, among many both are found. But in all, there is no possibility of saying that one is dominant among the more advanced, the other among the less advanced peoples. The distribution of the styles does not show any uniformity. Side by side with this, it may be noted that the ideational style tends to occur particularly in the fields of religion, magic, and other sacred and hieratic compartments of social life, no matter what they are concretely, while the visual style more frequently occurs even within the same culture, in the profane, daily routine, earthly fields of social life. Even when the visual art dominates the given society, the ideational style often still continues to exist in such hieratic compartments, whether they be the fields of religion, of magic ceremonies and symbols, of the important state functions and festivities, or of whatnot. The reason for such a gravitation of each of these forms is evident, since the sacred and hieratic compartments of social life deal with superempirical and transcendental ideational abstract, non-corporeal and somewhat non-material complex values, whether religion, magic, or the dignity and honour of the nation, or family pride, or the glory of the group, of patriotism, justice, sacrifice, virtue. They cannot be expressed in any adequate visual form because they do not have any. Hence the necessity of the ideational signs or symbols, pure or impure, for denoting such phenomena and for making them visible. On the other hand, purely empirical, daily, material phenomena have in the majority of the cases a visible form. Such a form can be rendered visually, hence the existence of visualism in such fields. 2. Fluctuation in the ideational, visual, and mixed styles in the course of the Greek culture. If we pay attention only to the greatest waves in the alternation of styles during the course of the Creto-Mycenaean and Greco-Roman cultures up to the beginning of the Middle Ages, then the main periods of domination of each of the main styles may be delineated roughly as follows. A. The known phase of the Creto-Mycenaean culture, extending from the 12th to the 9th century BC, exhibits the domination of a visual style of very refined form, amounting sometimes to an extreme impressionistic visualism. Whether the Greek culture properly was or was not a continuation of the Creto-Mycenaean culture, the period from about the 9th to the 6th century BC is marked by the domination of the ideational art. If the Greek was a continuation of the Creto-Mycenaean culture, then such a fact means that a decay had taken place in the visual style together with its passage into the ideational. If the Greek culture was not a continuation of the Creto-Mycenaean, then all we can say is that the earliest known phase of the Greek art must be regarded as predominantly ideational. See, from the second part of the 6th century BC, on the ideational pattern of Greek art seems to have been relatively weakening while the visual was rising. The descending course of the one and the ascending course of the other crossed in the 5th and 4th centuries BC, and as a result gave the marvellous blend of both styles in the form of the great idealistic art of Greece. Towards the end of the 4th century BC, the ideational stream thinned so much and the visual stream swelled to such an extent that the visual style became already slightly dominant. Its swelling continued at the cost of the ideational during the subsequent centuries of the Hellenistic culture. Therefore, the periods beginning with the end of the 4th century and the Hellenistic culture generally were marked by a decisive domination of the visual art, with its centres at the island of Rhodes, Alexandria, Pergamum, and the other foci of the Hellenistic culture. In other words, the purely Greek and Hellenistic phases of Greek culture ended with the domination of the visual-centered art and mentality. So this is really fascinating because it's almost like the Greek art starts out very sensate in the Minoan and Mycenaean period. It then becomes very ideational in the so-called Greek Dark Ages. It then adds a lot of sensate elements to become the idealistic art of the classical period. And then in the Hellenistic period, it decays to become sensate, stripping out its ideational elements. The Etruscan art, the early native art of the Romans, was before the influence of Hellenistic culture, a mixture of an ideational with a visual stream. Such a blend, not being perfect, yielded some idealistic forms, but these were neither dominant nor perfectly balanced, as in the case of Greece of the 5th century. The free and autonomous development of the Roman art was sharply interfered with by the powerful influence of the Hellenistic and in part the Greek culture, especially from the end of the 2nd century BC. This interference led to a peculiar mixture of the native Etruscan and late Hellenistic Greek forms of art, which resulted in a kind of rugged idealistic mixed with overripe visualism. The main effect of this was a series of imitative waves of Roman art, imitation of the Hellenistic visualism in the 1st century BC. The imitation of the idealistic art of Greece in the time of Augustus, and again several waves, all of a short duration, with quantitative, qualitative ups and downs of more or less extreme visualism, followed in some periods by a tiny stream of imitative or primitive ideationalism, such as the essence of the Roman art imitating here the Christian during the 1st century BC and the first 3 centuries AD. In no period during these centuries was it conspicuously ideational. On the contrary, it was predominantly visual, but more at one time and less at another. So, however, into this world of visualism with the beginning of Christianity, there entered the stream of pure ideationalism in the form of the early Christian art, the art of the catacombs. At the beginning, it was just a tiny rivulet, almost unnoticeable, running far away from the highway of Roman art. Very rapidly, to the surprise of the intellectuals of the Greco-Roman world, Christianity grew into a major power, and with it, the tiny rivulet of its ideational art swelled into a broad river. Partly because of this fact, partly because of the Roman non-Christian art itself, especially after the 3rd century, began to show more and more a swing towards a bizarre ideationism, which was somewhat like one of the mixed styles. Because of these circumstances, the non-Christian Roman art underwent a comparatively rapid transformation from the dominant visual into an incongruous mixture of the extreme visual of the ideational elements, Roman cubism and impressionism of a cinematographic type. And finally, after being engulfed by the Christian art, it became, beginning with the end of the 5th century, predominantly ideational. In this way, it ushered art into the ideational stream of the Middle Ages. So again, with the rise of Christianity, art in the West suddenly reverts back to being ideational again, and the whole cycle begins anew, essentially. Such schematically are the main ways of the alternation of the styles and the main periods of the domination of each of them in the history of the Creto-Mycenaean and Greco-Roman cultures. In order not to be accused of the usual sin of a sociologist, that the fitting of fact to preconceived generalizations and of a superficial playing with the facts of history, for the sake of unfolding the sufficiently rich content of the dry scheme presented above, I add a few typical details, colours, and factual shadings. Whether the early stage of the Creto-Mycenaean art, 2500 to 900 BC, failed to survive, as some investigators think, or whether it was from its beginning predominantly visual, the fact is that most of what we have left from the Creto-Mycenaean art is of a highly visual nature, and many of its objects, like the famous Vapio cup, are as perfect in their visual artistry as anything produced later. It is true that there are some ideational designs, geometric and others, on the vases and painted pottery of Mycenae and on the ivory casket from Komi, Cyprus, but these are few in number. The bulk of what we know of this art is clearly visual, even impressionistic. Of this nature are the excellent renderings of animals and human figures, with the mature knowledge of their anatomy, which the artworks show. Such are the slender, pretty, voluptuous feminine figures, the visual landscapes, the genre of daily life, the depiction of the common run of people. Such are the picturesqueness, drama, dynamism, and sensuality. These are the essential traits of this art. If a skillful visual art is to be styled ripe or overripe, the art appears to us to be so. This culture, which existed between 2500 BC and 900 BC, supposedly disappears as suddenly as it appears. We can leave it to historians to unravel the mystery of this supposedly sudden change. What is important for us is that the Greek art, which comes after the Creto-Mycenaean, the art of the so-called Archaic period, 1000 AD or 900 to 500 or 460 BC, is fundamentally different. The art of the 9th and possibly of the 8th century shows a growth of the geometric type, which in most cases is but a symbolic or ideational art, together with another stream, exemplified by the shield of Achilles, described in Homer, which with its visual delineation of daily life, bears the clear stamp of its visual type. These and other remains of the art of this period suggest its transitory nature, as it moves from the dominant visual of the previous age to the ideational type. Hence the mixture of these two streams. From this standpoint, the art of this period seems to have been similar to the art of the 4th and 5th centuries AD in Rome, when, as we shall see, art and culture were also in a transition from the visual to the ideational. During the 7th and as late as the first half of the 6th century, the ideational wave seems to have been rising higher. The geometrical and other forms of the ideational style predominate. The subjects, as they are exemplified by the chest of Kypselos and the throne of Apollo at Amyclae, become almost exclusively religious and mythological. Of the previous refined visualism, there remains little, if anything, either in technique or in the content of art. Art becomes quite conventional and formal, terms which mean in most of these cases what I style ideational. Beginning with the 6th century, especially the latter half, the first signs of a shift from the ideational towards the visual style appear in sculpture as well as in painting. An effort to render subjects somewhat more visually seems to have taken place in the Athenian school of sculpture and to a less degree in the school of Samos, Theodorus, Roikos, Thmailis, Telecles, and of Chios, Melas, Mikiades, Archimos, Boupolos, Athenis. The same seems to be true of the vase painting of the schools of Corinth, of Sicyon, and especially of Athens, Euomaros 600 to 590 BC, Caimon of Cleone 520 to 500 BC. Well, the art still remains predominantly ideational, though the ideationalism is progressively declining before a growing visualism. But soon the descending curve of ideationalism and ascending curve of visualism cross each other and produce a marvellous blending in the form of the sublime idealistic art of the 5th century BC. It has all the perfections of the mature visual technique. At the same time, its soul is still in the ideational, religious, ethical, and non-sensate world. We are in the age of the predecessors of Phidias, the Ageladas of Argos, 520 to 516 BC, of Miron, of Anates, 480 BC, of Calamis, of Pythagoras of Region, and others. The culmination point of the period and of all time in sculpture was Phidias, 500 to 432 BC. The first sculpture to produce ideal embodiments of the highest moral qualities, of which a Greek could have conceived, such as majesty, wisdom, or beauty, it was the first sculpture to combine the idealism with its perfect mastery of its material, thus producing a complete harmony that was attained by any before or since. Then comes Polykleitos, 440 to 410 BC, not to mention others like Agorokritos, Alcamenes, Colotes, and Callimachos. The subjects of the sculpture of the 5th century are gods, heroes, or ideational entities like Vitry, Nemesis, and so on. In this sense, the art is ideational, but the perfect technique is visual, hence it unites itself both styles in an unrivaled form and gives what I call the idealistic art. Greek painting of the 5th century is idealistic. The culmination of the 5th century painting was Polygnotus, 475 to 430 BC. He is rightly styled the Phidias of painting. In the view of the exceptional perfection of the idealistic art of the 5th century, it is advisable to outline its characteristics a little more substantially. Such an analysis should help us understand several typical traits of the idealistic style. A few quotations from specialists will help us in this purpose. This idealism of the Greek painting and sculpture of the 5th century shows itself first in an excellent knowledge of the part of the artist of human anatomy and the means of rendering it in its ideal or perfect form. In the type of the persons represented, in their postures, in the abstractness of the human type. There are no concrete portraits, no ugliness, no defective traits or types. Before us are immortals or idealized mortals. Old age is rejuvenated. The babies depicted as grown up. The women have little that is specifically womanish and appear like perfect athletes. There are no concrete landscapes. The postures and the expressions are free from any violent or debased or too human emotion and distorting passion. They are calm, serene, imperturbable like the gods, even the dead shrine with the same calmness and serene beauty. All the statues have a Greek profile, not because the Greeks were such as Winkelmann thought, but because it was a profile thought to be perfect. The chevelure is simple but perfectly ordered. The drapery is perfectly adapted to the body, simple and marvellous in its orderly beauty. Eyes are natural and perfect, and the shrine with calmness and serenity. The lips and mouth are ideally cut. The postures are dignified and idealized. This Greek art was deeply religious, patriotic, instructive, moralizing, educating. It's created not only for its own sake, but also as a means for such instruction and education. It was not separated from, but was the partner of religion, of civic and social morality. From the same spirit comes its collective and, in a way, anonymous character. Temples and their art were the expression of the popular beliefs and were the collective work of all the citizens. After the Persian Wars, it was necessary to thank the gods for the victory, for peace, for prosperity. And the whole Athenian people wanted to devote themselves to that national work, which was to honour the gods in their own country. There was a universal elan, ardent and enthusiastic desire to exalt the religion of the country, hence all tried to participate in the creation of the great national monument, the art of the 5th century. There was this idealism, there was unanimity, there was exaltation, hence the unity, harmony, and marvel of the art of that period. The period of pure idealism in Greek art was short, though it remained idealistic throughout the 5th and part of the 4th century. Nevertheless, after Phidias and Polygnotus, the ideational stream continued to become thinner, the sensate ampler. The marvellous balance of the idealistic art was then more and more lost, and this led to a gradual decline of the purity of the idealistic style. In sculpture, the first signs of a contamination of the pure idealism of Phidias appear already in the works of Polykleitos, of his ideation of the body, mainly athletes, rather than of the soul. However, his works and that of the contemporary artists remain predominantly idealistic still. Idealism, though more and more contaminated, continues in the works of the first half of the 4th century, and those of Cephisodotus, Praxiteles, Scopas, and even partly of Lysippus, not to mention lesser sculptors. So, again, these older idealistic works largely focus on great heroes or gods, and now as we're entering this period, the sensate, we're more rendering, the mundane, just athletes or regular everyday people. Towards the end of the 4th century, idealism is over and the rising tide of visualism definitely triumphs. Beginning with that period, we have the Hellenistic sculpture, which is clearly and conspicuously sensate or visual, with all the traits of such an art. A similar change took place in painting during the 4th century. Here are most important characteristics. 1. The figures of women, which were before rare, now become quite common subjects of sculpture and painting. They are represented not as robust and athletic, almost sexless youths, but as slender, voluptuous, sexual, seductive figures side by side with realistic figures of old women. 3. A similar change takes place in regards to figures of men. 4. Portraits of individual persons, especially rulers and others on whom the artist depended, become more and more common. 5. There appears more and more the representation of real landscapes and dramatic historical scenes. 6. The everyday life and form of the realistic genre becomes a very common topic. 7. The crowds, mobs, the common run of people, and especially pathological types, prostitutes, criminals, street urchins, etc., more and more replace the heroes and the ideal men. 8. The postures and expressions of the persons lose their idealized patterns to become realistic. Serenity and calm are replaced by the pathetic, by passion and emotionality, including suffering, sorrow, pain, fear, agony, and distortion. Static immobility is driven out by dynamism and violent movement. 9. Picturesqueness takes the upper hand over idealism. A street urchin in his rags is preferred to the idealized demigod. An inclination to the macabre, nudity of a sexual nature, etc. is another aspect of it. 10. If before mortals were depicted like the immortals, now the gods tend to be depicted like mortals. 11. It is natural that now the baby is depicted as a baby and the old man as a senile person. The woman is very different from the man, and if before the women were masculinized, now the men are frequently effeminized. Behind the art object, there is hardly noticeable any other ideal or value. Art for art's sake becomes a norm, and the art's sake is considered purely sensuously destined to give a sensate pleasure to the sensate man. 13. The tendency to gigantic quantitative proportion shows itself. What is lacking in quality is compensated for by hugeness, by large quantity, in size and mass and caliber. The biggest becomes one of the main means to be impressive. The biggest and the largest tends to become the criterion of the best. Quantity tends to replace quality. In brief, we are on the earth, in the fleshy world, sensate, utilitarian, material, Epicurean. And he's got some plates. So, on women conversing from Marina, it's this first one. 2. Women playing from Capua, that's in southern Italy. 3. Relief from the altar of Pergamum, so that's in Anatolia. Then 4. They've got very famous sculpture Lacuna Troy, and his sons being strangled by snakes. And then 5. Philetaerus of Pergamum. Then we've got some more plates. We've got portrait of Aringatore. We've got 2 Pompeian wall painting. 3 and 4 are portraits of Augustus. And 5 is Arapacis from the Augustan Parthenon. Yeah, these all look relatively idealistic. On plate 11, numbers 1 and 2 show examples of everyday life topics with a common type of people. Females playing bridge, which became the common topic of Hellenic art. Number 3s and 4s show the pathetic, dramatic, theatrical tendency together with visual dynamism. Nothing in the sculptures is at rest. Everything is in violent motion. Number 5 is a sample of visual, matter-of-fact portraits with all the peculiar traits of a given individual without any idealization. Finally, the position and the mentality of artists also changed greatly. The artist became emancipated from the fetters of religion, community, mores, and whatnot. From now on, he became a servant of art for art's sake, as he began to depend upon various patrons, the rulers and the rich. In this way, there appeared a new type of artist in Greece, that of the court, later on that of the rich and influential men. Thus, instead of being free servants of the community and of the transcendental values, they became friends and valets of the rich and the powerful. Take further, for instance, the treatment of gods like Apollo, Dionysius, or Eros. What has the Eros of the 5th century, the serious young Phoebus, in common with the boy lovers of the Alexandrian period? Or the Aphrodite of the 5th century, a vigorous woman chasteningly clad with the soft voluptuousness of the naked goddess of the Hellenistic times? All is there in common between the bearded and the garbed Dionysius of archaism and the youthful god nude and effeminate of the Greco-Roman? Or take the Aegean Cretan avoided stripping completely, and the Egyptians, Chaldeans, Assyrians, and Etruscans were averse to it, except in the case of the lower orders. Woman was draped from head to foot in the 6th century and the first half of the 5th. The second half of the 5th introduced some beginning of nudity. The 4th century went far along this road. Draperies now slip off the shoulders altogether and only stop at the hips. Aphrodite and Milo, the Praxiteles Aphrodite of Arles, for instance, Praxiteles is the first completely to undrape the goddess, e.g. Chidian Aphrodite. No garment enwraps her. She is nude and completely displays all her beauties. Later on, women invaded art. Eroticism and sensate Epicureanism generally reigned supreme in these visual art creations, and so it was with other human figures. These tendencies became still more pronounced in the Hellenistic period. Here, women became one of the main subjects of art, and if the Aphrodites of the 4th century still retained something of the vigor and chastity of the 5th century. The Hellenistic Aphrodites, the nymphs, the Menades, became charming and sensual women of an easy virtue, something similar to the influential courtesans, and from their bodies emanated the restless charm of the voluptuousness. Male visages are now rendered mainly as smooth-shaven in contrast with the preceding period. The love and nature of landscapes grows, parallel to the preoccupation with the picturesque, assuming often the half-romantic tendency of the tired urbanist to find rest in the country among pastoral scenery. Likewise, an accurate rendering of animals and a frequent use of them as subjects became common in art. All this is followed by the disease of colossism, and by a tendency to substitute quantity for quality. The biggest and largest for the best. One can see this in virtually all forms of the Hellenistic art, in music and architecture, in literature, the bestsellers, in sculpture and painting. It is enough to remind the reader of the Colossus of Rhodes, about 100 feet high, of the Halicarnassus Mausoleum, the tomb of Molossus, 140 feet high, of the large scale of the Pergamon mean frieze, and other sculptures, of the large buildings and large paintings in order to make clear this trait of the visual art. Such are the main traits of the visual art as they are manifest in the Hellenistic period. No doubt during that period idealism and even ideationalism in art did not disappear entirely, but they became quite a thin stream, just as visualism had been a minor rivulet in the Greek art of the 5th and of the preceding centuries. Oh, my voice is beginning to go a bit. How long is this next section? Okay, it's only a few pages, so I'll finish this chapter and then I think I'll wrap the stream up. So, right. 3. Fluctuation of the styles in Roman painting and sculpture. The course of Roman painting and sculpture, considered from our present standpoint, can be briefly told. Its first source, the Italic art, was rather geometric, cubistic, ideational. Its second source, the Etruscan art, so far as we know it, belonged to a mixed or moderate visual naturalistic style. The portrait bust of which a sample is given, the so-called bust of a prominent orator, Aringator, shown in number 1 on plate 12, show a clear inclination to visual style without any notable ideational or idealistic tendencies. And the Greek art, unfortunately, in its Hellenistic visual style, began to influence Roman painting and sculpture. The result was, from about the end of the 2nd century BC, an interruption in the spontaneous development of the Roman arts, the development of eclecticism and imitation, together the Italic ideational and a softening and an extreme development of the Etruscan naturalism along the lines of the Hellenistic art. The somewhat rugged Etruscan visual art was turned into a visualism that was overripe, effeminate, exotic, idyllic, and impressionistic. This is partly exemplified by the paintings of Pompey and by other surviving pictures, partly by the Rococo style of Arcesilaus and other painters of the boudoir mythology. Since that time, the Roman arts became imitative in a considerable degree and remained so up to the end of the visual sensate culture of the Roman Empire, the change being mainly in the replacement of the models of the Greek art which was imitated. Of course, it was not a mere imitation. The Etruscan source remained a modified imitation. Nevertheless, the main patterns were taken from Greece. Throughout its history, from the 1st century BC to 4th century AD, Roman sculpture and painting were predominantly visual. Their sculpture and painting remained photographic and large in size, but the visualism had remained various shades and degrees. In the second part of the 1st century BC, it imitated the 6th century archaistic patterns and the Alexandrian effeminate Rococo. In the Augustan period, it was pseudo-idealistic visualism, imitating the idealistic art of Greece of the 5th century, but with a specific flavour of visualism. It was not a real idealism spontaneously springing from deep sources. It was rather a change of a fashion of the pattern for imitation as a reaction against the imitation of the archaic Attic and the overripe Hellenistic patterns of the preceding century. Hence, the Augustan imitative idealistic art exemplifies in the portrait statues, in the Augustan Parthenon, and in other sculptural and pictorial monuments of the time. Here are 2 examples of this art: an idealized sculpture of Augustus and a part of the Augustan Parthenon, the Arapacis Augusti, with its overabundance of decorations and a lack of cohesion in this scheme. The pseudo-idealism was short-lived, and soon after, Augustus was replaced by more extreme visualism, impressionistic, photographic, singulistic, and illusionistic. In the Arch of Titus, each portrait is like a modern photograph, the reproduction of a passing impression. The chief post-Augustan fluctuations in the history of the art may be summed up as follows. Under the Flavian dynasty, the chief aim of the artist was an imitative naturalism, illusionism. Under Trajan, a different tendency is at work. It is historicism, concentration on the rendering of the real historical scenes and personalities as they are. Lastly, under Hadrian, AD 117 AD, we have an archaistic reaction in the form of a cold academic imitation of the archaistic and idealistic art of Greece, but without its soul and mentality, and with a sensuousness quite foreign to the Greek models. Under Marcus Aurelius, AD 161, we are in a Rococo age of an insipid refinement and effeminate elegance. Under Caracalla, AD 212, came exaggerated passion, particularly rage, dynamism, and colossism. Then soon comes a decay of Roman art more exactly, a decline in the visual style and the reappearance of this distorted ideational style. Their mixture in the 4th and 5th centuries gives them peculiar mixed style, transitory, neither ideational nor visual. With the continued decline of visualism and the continued rise of the Christian ideational style, becomes the ideational art of the Middle Ages as a new wave which replaced the preceding visual wave of the Hellenistic and Roman visual art. Whatever the models imitated, the essential and visual character of the Roman art during these centuries remains unquestionable. It manifests itself in the photographic rendering of persons, even in the periods of idealization, in everyday or historical topics, in an inclination towards huge size, in profuse over-decoration, spirit of sensuality, voluptuousness, eroticism, pervading even the idealized portraits, in this cinematographic method of rendering figures, in the restless dynamism of their posture and setting, in the pathetic, emotional, and passionate rendering of feelings, in endless amoretti and sensuality, and in many other features which are the traits of the visual style. Similar in essence were the character and changes in the styles of the Roman painting from the 2nd century BC, when the Hellenistic influence affected it. As you pass from the incrustation style to the architectural style, then to the ornate style, and then to the intricate style, we observe an increase in the occurrence of the various signs of visualism and illusionism. During the subsequent times, from the end of the 1st to the 4th century AD, there were various imitative waves, somewhat similar to those in sculpture, but whatever was the pattern imitated of the Hellenistic refined and oversweet style, pastoralism and superannuated idyllic themes, classical examples, archaic chilly academism, or whatnot. The dominant tone of all these varieties continued to be predominantly visual, with all the traits of the visual arts, including complexity, colossicism, Epicureanism, and sensuality. Vitruvius, Tacitus, Petronius, Arbiter, Pliny, Dionysius of Halicarnassus all stress the visual character of the painting and unanimously complain. Oh, yeah, some more plates. So, more plates. Complexity, overdeveloped technique, colossusm, voluptuousness, and contrast it unfavorably with the earlier painting, simpler but more original, more talented, more sound, and more beautiful. Thus, in sculpture as well as in painting, and further on we shall see also in music, literature, architecture, and drama, the Roman art pagan up to the second part of the 4th century remained predominantly visual, with all the characteristics of such an art. These, as schematized, were the main pulsations of the ideational, visual, idealistic, and mixed styles in the Greek and Roman painting and sculpture. The periods of rise, domination, and decline of each of these styles are only approximate, but that they did exist, we can be sure. And as I said, that's where I'll end the stream. So thank everybody for listening. In terms of future streams, I'm thinking of possibly covering stuff viewers have suggested. I know some have recommended even aliens resistance to evil by force. That does sound interesting. I actually listened to a stream Prudentialist did on that as part of his series with Dimes. The only problem is that book is that I can't find a digital PDF copy of it on the internet. So unfortunately, that's unlikely because I prefer to do things I can share on screen. And same is with the what was it? Byzantism and Slavdom by Konstantin Leontiev, which someone else had suggested. Yeah, if anybody has any suggestions, I'm certainly welcome to check them out as long as I can find a version online I can read and share on screen. So just going to check we've not had any super chats on Entropy. One moment. No super chats and entropy. Okay, so if you like my content, then please like, subscribe, and you can either become a channel member and get access to many streams that are behind the paywall. This Saturday at 3 p.m., me and Hunger should be going through the next episode of the Modern Iran series. We'll be looking at the middle Safavids, so going from Abbas the Great through Safi to Abbas II, the height of the Safavid Empire. So please check that out if you are following that series and want to see more. So thank you everybody for watching, and good night.